Okay, and let me share this. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start. This is the first time we're going to do the book of Colossians. And kind of what prompted me to do this was just um, a question came out or a comment came up this weekend about uh, leaving Babylon, syncretism, Catholic Church, taking this idea of mixing stuff together within a congregation or religions and then Christians not being able to see what's truth and what's nonsense. And so it kind of prompted me to look into it. Now, chapter one is not dealing with this, chapter two will. And so we're going to kind of give some background and get into one of the major themes of the first chapter is for the first fruits, Yeshua being first fruits of the dead. And that's one of the major themes here. But there's a lot of other stuff going on here that I want to get into. So without further ado, let me minimize this and go to the first. Okay, so this is the area right here. What you're seeing here is a valley. There's a three city valley that this has, and this is in about central Turkey, and where this is located. And this, but right now, it's just ruins, the ancient city, and they really haven't excavated. Maybe like 1 or 2% of the whole mound has been excavated. Most of it hasn't. So all they do is have it marked, and that's pretty much it. That's what I heard from Rico when he went there. Um, and this kind of gives you an idea of what you're looking at. So you have three cities in this valley. You have Hierapolis, which is not mentioned much. Laodicea, which everybody knows about. Laodicea being, being lukewarm, a believer. And and what's interesting is where Laodicea is, there is a spring, a hot spring that when the water comes down from the hot spring, it's warm. And the reason why historically why it was called they spit it out because when they would drink it would make them sick because it was still warm, they couldn't drink it. And that's the kind of the story about Laodicea. And then just down the valley, in that same valley I just showed you, is Colossae. Now what's important about this is there's this royal road leads right here. It leads all the way to toward the Euphrates River and then on into Persia, into Babylon. So the armies would march or come through this area. It was also a center of trade. And you probably know everybody knows about Ephesus and some of the other cities mentioned in Book of Revelations. But that's kind of what you're looking at in the area where it's at. So though these cities were far from any big city like Ephesus at the time, they weren't isolated because of that road that goes all the way to Persia. And so there was a trade route that ran along this, and so Ephesus would be kind of a prime city, and then as you go downhill toward the Euphrates, you do sort of trading locations along that route. So at one point in the third century BC, Colossae has became one of the most important of the three cities, and it produced a textile known for its dark red wool that's used by kings, and it was very expensive wool that they would produce there, and so that's what made them famous. So during the Roman period, 60 61, this is probably around when this book was written. The Roman historian Tacitus mentions an earthquake that destroyed Laodicea, which I just showed you. And Laodicea, because of its importance, was rebuilt quickly. We don't know how long it took to rebuild Colossae, but it was rebuilt. But they suffered a lot because of that. So today, however, nothing really remains. Like I was telling her, there's nothing. There's this tail, a mound, and a very, very little excavated. So there's not much to look at. They can see where the amphitheater was, but other than that, not much. So we know that how the city became important and why it connects to Israel is somewhere in 213 BC, Antiochus III, he resettles 2,000 Jewish families, which is pretty significant. It's a lot of people. He resettles them in this area. And so there was a strong Jewish minority to the time that Paul came in there. And that's one of the probably the main reasons why Paul and others went to this location and set up synagogues and home groups, etc. Right. And as we said earlier, the proximity to nearby highways ensured that the Colossians were always being exposed to the latest idea, the imperial worship, all kinds of other belief systems and religions, and they fused them together. An example of this, if I go back here a little ways onto the map, so this area down here is modern day kind of Lebanon, Syria, Turkey come together in this area. Uh, the the people that live in that area has this. They would do the same thing. They would take Islam and Christianity and Judaism and they would mix it together. And they kept all the feasts of all the different people because they didn't want to make anybody angry. And so this is the idea of syncretism, which we're going to talk about it in the second chapter. So, as you look at the city, and it's a highway that people come and go, why that's important is this is how all these ideas get mixed in, and it kind of bleeds into the congregation itself. Okay. So, when you plan a congregation, and this is interesting how Paul goes about it. So, the first time we mention this, it's somewhere in the book of Acts, chapter 19. It mentions uh, the ministry of Paul and how he's planning it. But if you read here, while Paul had probably passed through Colossae on a second missionary journey, he didn't found the church. He wasn't the founder of the church at Colossae directly. Rather, he taught this guy named Epaphras, whom Paul mentions in this letter several times, especially in this chapter. Um, what he did is he rented a hall, and this is really appropriate for today. He rented a lecture hall up at Tyrannus, which is up the road, and all these people would come to this lecture hall. Most likely, he did these things on the Sabbath, and as they began to grow and teach them, they would go back to their local communities and begin planting small congregations. Now, this is really important because what they did in 53 AD is kind of like what we are going to do. We plant a congregation, and from that, as people move, they go plant other places. It grows. I mean, Joseph and I had this conversation, today about how you may have one congregation, but it ends up being a part of two or three other different congregations that come from it. You look at when we started Shiloh. Shiloh really is responsible for City on the Hill, Emmaus, and other small groups that are around the Houston area. Why did that happen? Because you start together and then people splinter off and begin other works, and that's what happened here. So this went on for 2 years, and all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the provinces, according to Acts 19, verse 10, they came to this hall, they studied, they learned, they were taught, and then they went out. So Paul didn't travel through the province of Asia very much, but people came to him. They learned about Yeshua, they took the message of the gospel, and they went to the hometown. So the founder of this congregation is a guy named Epaphras, most likely. And if you can say that easily, good luck. That's a hard name to say, Epaphras.
Epaphras.
Okay. So we learned from the outset of this first chapter that this congregation actually worshiped in spirit and truth. And we're going to see that right from the beginning. And I want to expand on these first verses. Chapter 1, verse 5 said, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of this you have heard in the word of truth, okay, the gospel, which has come to you, as indeed the whole world it is bearing fruit and increasing. So let me ask you guys, what book are they reading to get the word of truth?
They would read what we call the Tanakh, right?
Exactly right. There's no New Testament. There's no epistles and letters being passed around. This is purely teaching the gospel from the Tanakh. Now, I would challenge everyone here if you could teach the gospel for the Tanakh, I think it's very hard for us today. All right. But this is teaching something, and which is the people who are looking in the future toward, they could go back and look at those scriptures and say, this is the promise that came from, and they can teach from those scriptures. I would challenge everybody here to be able to do that. Sit down, take any book of the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and teach the gospel from that. And it's actually in every single book, elements of this gospel, which we'll kind of get into here in a minute. Verse 6, which has come to you as indeed in the whole world it is bearing fruit. This is a common theme for this chapter, and increasing, as it also does among you since the day you heard it and understood the grace of God in truth. And that same truth is coming from the scriptures, the Tanakh. Okay. So most people think the gospel received. A lot of people will tell you today, if you go to church and say, what was the church of Colossians reading? They would say, oh, they would say the writings of Paul, probably most of them, or a gospel or two. None of them would say the Tanakh, so they wouldn't understand it. So the only thing that they had was an oral Torah or an oral instruction of what happened in the Gospels. This is passing on what people saw and down in Jerusalem and bringing it to the Colosseum and telling that oral story. So at this point, the only thing they have is an oral Torah of Yeshua and the Gospels and the Apostles. That's all they have. And then they would have obviously the Tanakh. Uh, this word hope laid up for you in heaven. I want to kind of get in that real quick. What does that mean to y'all?
Hmm. Hope laid up.
Okay. I would say hope is earnest expectation for a fulfilled end,
Okay.
something
Got
like that.
specifics? Got a specifics?
Yeah.
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry,
Okay,
Robert.
so read that verse, what I got in blue. What does it mean, hope laid up for you in heaven? What does that mean?
Eternal
There,
inheritance.
well, it does it relate to what Jesus said? I go to prepare a place for you.
Okay, there you go.
That
So
That's
he
basically the
said,
hope in heaven that we're going to be receiving everything that we actually, he hopes to basically we get to the eternal king to be able to be in heaven to be taught that. Is that correct?
yeah, that's correct. I mean, so what mom says, what she said about that you should say I'm preparing a place, that's part of the hope. What John said, he's talking about eternal life. What you're saying, he's getting us for an immortal body, a resurrected body. This is the hope. And it's not a subject, unfortunately, it's not a subject that we talk about very much. I think it's a subject we should spend at least once a month on talking about the eternal hope, because when you're grinding it out, you have to have something that you're looking for in the future, something that gives you a desire. We don't talk about the crowns that are given out and the rewards.
Hmm.
We don't talk. It's very rarely mentioned. And I always thought if I'm going to come, like you've got the Olympics going on, the Winter Olympics, right? What's their hope? To get a
Gold.
first, second, or third, get a medal, and then go back home and tell the story of how it was, and for some people, they're looking for a fame that comes out of it. But that most athletes are just hoping they can medal or do their best, right? Hope they don't fail. Don't make a mess out of it. So for us, our eternal hope can't just be the grind. That it can't be our hope. That can't be what we're always talking about. It has to be this eternal hope, and we need to spend some time on it. And he's addressing it. So I would like to interlace every teaching with this hope from now on. For the rest of the year, we're going to talk about it. So you have something that you know what you're looking forward to.
I think that's such a good idea. I love that. I just reminds me during COVID when people were so scared. I went to I already had COVID, and I went to go deliver some food to a food bank for the
Right?
church. And I was like, "Oh, don't worry, I already had COVID." And the two pastors, they like literally stepped back from me. And I'm like, and all these churches that shut down, I'm like, what are you afraid of? I mean, it's going to even be better when we're not here. Like, I
That's right.
just, yeah, I thought, do we not believe the Bible?
Yeah, it was funny. I just finished a book. I don't have it here. It was I was listening to a podcast from John Burke, and he was talking about this guy who was in a coma for about a month, 5 weeks, and then and during that 5 weeks, he was in the eternal realm, and he toured the whole place. And what's interesting thing about it, he talked about in everything that he said and he wrote down, scripture corroborates it. So there wasn't like a heresy or something that's odd. Everything that came out of his mouth. But one of the things he talked about is just everybody was well. He said he had aunts and grandparents who were sickly or had deformities, and he would come up and he knew who they were, and they had no flaws. They're perfect. And I thought, that's cool. That's really what we're looking for. On earth, we do have suffering because of sin and death, right? But we have that thing to look forward to in the future, which is exactly what Alexander's saying.
but
Verse 7.
Robert,
Yes,
a
go
lot
ahead.
of people, yeah, I think the churches have been accused of talking about the pie in the sky. That's kind of, you don't hear much about that anymore. But that's the other end of it. Well, I'm going to go to heaven, so whatever happens, I don't know. Maybe Maybe it's not
Well,
heard
if
that
you're
much
talking
anymore.
about the pie that you're going to get here on Earth, I think that should be shrunk down to almost nothing. If you're
No,
talking about this eternal hope where you can be in
right.
eternal worship with the Lord and have a and one of the things I found out interesting about this book, he said everybody had something they were doing. He said everybody was going someplace with a purpose and joy and smiles. Like that's the way it should be today. We should be going through a grind. It should be with a purpose and something trying to please God and the mission that He gave us. So,
Right.
and so the second part he talks about in verse 7, it says, it talks about worship. A congregation that worships in truth and in spirit is a congregation that's on the right track. Verse 7 is just as you learn it from Epaphras, our beloved fellow servant, he's a shepherd. He is a faithful minister of the Messiah on your behalf, and he has made known to us your love in the Spirit. Now I thought, well, how does that take place? So now I'm going to explain how that works. He has made known to us in your love in the Spirit. Verse 9. And so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you. Again, this is in the Spirit, asking that you may be fulfilled with the knowledge of His will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. So there's some things when a congregation is formed. This is from Scripture. The first thing God does is He plants His menorah in there. He puts His Spirit of God is placed in that place. Second thing, an angel is assigned to it. So if there's going to be a menorah, there's going to be an angel, and that angel is going to report back. Let God know what's going on here. Um, the body of believers will intercede for each other. So there's a so as you pray for one another and you bear each other's burdens, what's happening is this should be happening in the Spirit. The Holy Spirit should prompt you to lay hands on somebody, to pray for them, to lift them up. And so when you have a congregation that does this, then you have a congregation that's connected directly to the Spirit of God. And also, when he begins giving people in that congregation dreams and visions, he shows the needs and strengths of each congregation and the individuals. What happens is they begin to connect. Okay, now, I don't know about you, but I thought about this before. How do you connect through the body of believers throughout the whole world? This is the way you do this. We should be praying for the Iranian church right now. They're under huge suffering, but there are brothers in Messiah, and we should connect to them
Right.
in their suffering during their time when they're going through such
Mhm.
devastation. Same thing in Nigeria. They should be connected to us in the spirit. When we close our eyes and we go into our prayer closet, you pray for these. These are believers. These are brothers. There has to be that connection through the Holy Spirit that we all come together. And we may not see the results, but maybe God shows one of you. He gives you a vision. He shows you exactly how He is taking care of them, how He's shielding people and protecting them. So, if I walked away from this congregation after a few weeks, I would say this is a congregation that's healthy. It's operating in the Spirit. It's learning truth. They've got the knowledge of God. They're putting the cares of the body first. Okay, and that's the first thing that I would notice about this congregation as I looked at it from an outsider coming in, and I stood a little bit of time. I would say this is a healthy congregation. There's something good going on, and that's what he's addressing in chapter 1. But in chapter 2, we're going to see a little bit different. Okay, so one of the themes about Colossians, specifically chapter 1, is the fruit. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about it because Matthew 7:15 says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Um, I would also say you would judge them. When I say judge, that doesn't mean you're going to condemn them, but you judge them. You'll be able to discern uh, their fruits by what you see comes out of their mouth, their actions. You can look at their family in general. You can look at a lot of things, discern fruits. It says, are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Verse 17. So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Now we see, remember when Yeshua, he curses that fig tree that wasn't bearing fruit out of season? There's a common theme all through scripture about bearing good fruit, Genesis through Revelations. And so, do we throw each other out because we're not bearing good fruit? No, I think it has to be spoken about. We have to talk about this. and what good fruit and what does that mean and how it should be, how it should play out in somebody's life. He says, verse 20, thus you will recognize them by their fruits. So Paul's telling that this body was bearing good fruit. This is a healthy congregation when you first come in there. And from the outside, he seems to see not sense any problems because usually in a lot of his letters, he comes out of the box. He goes, I have this against you. I see this in you, or this is what's going on. He doesn't do this immediately here. Uh, Chapter 1, verse 10 says, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, bearing fruit in every good work. Okay, so there has to be works involved here, and increasing in the knowledge of God. So what's more important, bearing fruit in your works or knowledge of God? What becomes should be a priority?
Looks like they're equal there. Supposed to be doing both of them.
Okay, anybody else?
And fruit, I think of as fruits of the spirit: love, joy, peace, patience. If you're not growing in love, you're not growing in Christ.
So you're saying that the bearing good fruit in your works is more important, okay? More important than understanding scripture. Okay, mom says they're both. Anybody else?
I think it's both because you need to bear good fruit to increase the knowledge of God.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, good.
Again, we're judged based on what we do, not what we know.
Yeah,
And
that
we
and
act out of what we know.
It could be too that what comes to mind is the basics of bearing good fruit allows you to learn more about the Father.
yes, that's good. That's
It's
good.
like that's the pathway to increasing knowledge as opposed to, oh, I have all this knowledge. Like the other way doesn't really work.
Yeah.
You have to bear good fruit first, and then I don't know, but that's what I would think.
So when you go to a funeral and they say, we just went to a funeral, mom and I did for my brother's father-in-law, and what was the statement they made? Yeshua says, welcome here, my good and faithful servant, right? Good and faithful servant. When he says that, he's saying he's been faithful to serve. He never says, welcome because you mastered Torah. It doesn't say that, right? And then if you look at Matthew 25, which when he says, when I was naked, you put clothes on me. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. These are all works. This is the bearing of good works. So again, Mom, Paul, you're right. They are very important, but what ultimately is going to judge us and the hope for the future we talked about in the first verses is the fruit that we're bearing, and I think throughout your whole life you should look at yourself, privately, and be introspective. Am I doing this? Every once in a while, go and read about the fruit of the spirit and look at that and use it as a measuring stick of yourself. And so if we know that from define the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, forbearance, which is an interesting one. I'll talk about that in a minute. Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Self-control and forbearance are very, very similar. Holding back your anger, knowing full well that you don't want to be a stumbling block to somebody, is part of forbearance. God calling in the debt that you owe him, holding back and giving you mercy, is forbearance. Not calling in the loan, that's forbearance. Giving people mercy is forbearance. And this is kind of an interesting thing because we don't usually associate. I mean, this is the King James word. There's other translations use another thing, but it has to do with collecting a debt in essence. So
We
all
had a
the
whole we
Go
had a
ahead,
whole
Mom.
Bible, yeah, we had a Bible study on forbearance because it's a word we really don't, the King James, we really didn't
Yeah.
understand very well. What in the world does forbearance mean anyway? So now I'm glad they've kind of translated
Well,
different. What is the Hebrew actually? If you were looking back at the original or Greek, I guess here.
I didn't have the time to study that out, but I will say there is a parable where talents are given and to these three servants, right? And one triples it and the other doubles it, and then the other one buries it. And he said, if you just taken it to the bankers, right? If you just take it to the bank and earned some interest, I would at least given you a reward. And you couldn't even do that. And so when he shows up to collect and check, that's when he's calling the chips, so to speak. That's the measurement of forbearance. What have you done with this? And should he have mercy on you for doing nothing in the kingdom? It's a good question. Should we have mercy on each other for not living up to our calling in the kingdom? How and I don't congregations never talk about this stuff. They really don't. They don't get into in your responsibility in the kingdom. But I think it has to be a big part because what makes a congregation um, holy is that they work as one. Okay, how the Spirit of God works there is it works as one, and one is not necessarily more important. It has a different position inside that congregation, but not more important than the other. And everybody should play that role. Uh,
Question.
Go ahead.
Uh, I've been asking what my calling is my whole life, and I'm 64. It's never been revealed to me. I just go on day by day, and if somebody runs across me, you know what I mean? I do the best that I can with everybody I run across. But, you're sitting there saying, everybody's calling and stuff. Is that like gifts that you're saying and stuff
Yeah.
like that?
It's gifts, it's your responsibilities, things that you're called to do within a congregation. If you like, some people get the call to minister within a community, and some may be far away, some may be, but everybody here on this Zoom call, every single one of us has one thing in
Right.
common. We are to
Right.
witness about the good news to somebody else. Every single one
Correct.
of us. So
Right. And
go ahead.
well, I want to speak to that because in our ministry, I I have been blessed actually that I have be able to see people and affirm their gifts. And I think that's what's lacking in our church. We don't affirm each other's gift.
It's good.
Uh, we had a young man that was just downrating himself. He had taught a lesson. He was an amazing teacher. And then the last thing he said, I'm sorry, he just went all over and apologized how horrible his teaching was. Well, that's a satanic attack
Yeah,
trying to get him not to use a gift God gave him. So we need to go and affirm. Somebody did that to me, and we need to do that to each other. And somebody need to affirm you because you definitely have a gift that is unique to you. Uh, and yes, you do.
And that God gave you. When I first got here in Texas, I had no idea what the different churches were. And so I asked the pastor, he said, go to the care home. I want to learn how to pray at the care home. Well, I did that for a year, and I ended up staying there for 8 years. But the gift that I know that confirmed it, that I was always into the horses, into the horse world since I was young. And lo and behold, doing his work at the care home, my role in the horses just expanded more and more than what I ever knew. But now that I look back, I know that it was a gift I had from God. That's how I learned what my gift was. Something
yeah.
that I did and later, oh, that's what he, because I know that I'm gifted with that. If
That's
that
exactly right.
right.
So, but what it required Paul to do is to step out. He had to step out.
You
Heard
know,
that recently. I've heard recently three different things. Everyone who is a Christ, who is a follower of Yeshua, has the same purpose, and that is to know God and make Him known. But everyone has a different calling, and my calling, in a sense, is to explore, build, grow, and sustain. If there is something that I where I can do any or all of those things, then that really makes me come alive. But then the more detailed or finite thing is, what is your assignment? Right now, that my assignment is to explore, build, and grow as a guy who spreads gravel. Who's has a grading business. So I've heard that those are kind of three different levels or layers of purpose, calling, and assignment.
Well, it's great if you can have your calling and your calling that God gave you. In other words, what he sent you here to the earth to be, if it matches up with your what you do for a living, that's fantastic. But 90% of the time, it does not match up. Most of the time, it's above and beyond what you do for a living. So, we're gonna spend. Go ahead, Brad.
yeah, I was wanting to interesting thing. We gotta let somebody you guys know. You don't know this, but I met with the rabbi this weekend. I was blown away. You know what's funniest thing is He actually, his gift, since he's Jewish, it's going to blow all of us away. He's not Orthodox. He is a rabbi. He became a rabbi in order to talk to the Jews to bring them to the Yeshua, but he does not let no one ever know that because it's kind of like an undercover thing. And it's very interesting how Rabbi John Virgil, he's actually a rabbi, but he portrays himself as a Orthodox rabbi. He told me a secret. Don't tell anybody he said this because he said it in confidence, but he actually is doing this to breach the Jews to believe in the Mashiach of Yeshua. It floored me. So that must be a gift that he has since he is Jewish ethnically to be able to reach the other people come in. It's very interesting. He says it's hard for him to do, but he never denies Yeshua. He just don't talk about it. But little by little, he's actually bringing the
He's planting
Jews.
seeds.
Yes, that's exactly what he's asking me. He's like, would you like to become what I'm doing? I was like, well, I don't know yet, but yes.
Yeah,
And
most people
Tyler,
can't do like those guys from One for Israel, just go out and do street ministry in Jerusalem. That's hard to do. So, all right. So one of the things I think is more than important than anything else, what bears fruit, what's going to be judged, what the Lord is going to see beyond anything else is the relationships that you have, marriages, children, family members, and how you interacted with those relationships. Were you a stumbling block for that in those relationships, or were you edifying in those relationships? And those are the things that I think in this book, Colossians, it's talking about. That the relationship is more important than anything else because God put us here to be in relationship with us and for us to be in relationship with other people in Him, and that's what's going to be judged. So, verse 13, it says he begins introducing this idea right here that's real. We're going to really see it reflect in chapter 2, but he starts talking about these two kingdoms, right? See, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to a kingdom of his beloved son. So there's a kingdom of darkness which we all have been in. And then when we get to know Yeshua and talk about this congregation, you basically are transferred. You come out. Now keep in mind when you come into, for example, years ago, one of my best friends, he was a liaison officer in the military, and he worked the border between Egypt and Israel. So he knew the his point of contact on the Israel side, he knew his point of contact on the Egyptian side, and he would befriend both, but both of those people never would talk to each other, right? And he was that transition place. And I always thought about that, between two kingdoms, two countries, there's a transition place. It's usually a safe place a lot of times because it's a border, it's a threshold. But in that threshold, you don't want to stay too long because if you stay in that threshold too long, you can be snatched back. So it's important that you come completely into the kingdom of God in his son and begin to work in if you're working what we've been talking about in your God-given responsibility or your gift, etc., then you're not going to go back. Why would you go back if you have full joy in serving the king? When you serve a king, there's full joy. When you're in that threshold, not figuring it out, then you can't you can easily be snatched away. And I think this is kind of important, is that there is a geographical place between these two kingdoms. And over Colossians, we're going to see this play out. Understanding the geographically the people of Laodicea, Colossae, Hierapolis were under the dominion geographically of these Elohims who had authority in this valley and everywhere around us, all the way to Ephesus. There was Elohims that had control, and look how God works. You had a wicked Greek king that took 2,000 Jews 200 years prior and planted them in this area. Okay. 200 years later, he would send Apostle Paul to go in there and set up congregations waiting for this to happen. And these Jewish people in these congregations would be the plant where that seed, that fertilizer would be planted on, and they would grow the kingdom. Now, if somebody said to those people, those 2,000 families, are you happy about being planted in this place? They would have screamed and said, no, I want to go back to Jerusalem. I want to go back to Galilee. I want to go back to my land, right? They had no idea that 200 years prior, God was planting them in a place, planting the seed, putting the fertilizer in where Paul and others would arrive and establish the work of the king. Okay. So they were what we would call, in military terms, a Trojan horse to the enemy. It's really cool. And so, how the Lord worked this and why this congregation even existed. Okay, verse 15, he says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on as we get into this. But let me say one thing about Him being the firstborn of all creation. When He resurrected, an earthquake didn't just go through all of Jerusalem. An earthquake went throughout the entire planet and in the heavenly realm, because at that point, all these fallen angels and all these watchers and all these Elohims who had agendas, who were working out their plan instead of God's plan, they got a message and it was very strong. And they knew that their time was very short, that their geography was going to be pushed away, that their dominions were going to be crushed, that their power over people would be diminished and eventually fade away. And so a message was sent when the firstborn of all creation rose again. Their days were numbered. Verse 16, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. We are the visible. These Elohims are invisible. And notice what it says, whether these thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And so initially they were supposed to serve Yeshua. That's who they were told to serve. They were supposed to serve him, and they chose to be worshipped as opposed to taking the worship and directing it back to the Lord. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now I'm going to show you a couple things as we get into this theme about these two kingdoms and what's going on in Colossae and how important and how the enemy comes back. Because I was an intelligence officer in the army, and we could try to figure out what the enemy was doing, but they have a say so in the battle. You may have the perfect plan, but the enemy also has a response, and they also have a say so. And how you plan, how you go about it, God, it's obviously God's plan, right? He's putting the plan in place. They're going to try to do a counterattack, and we're going to show you in chapter 2 what they do to counterattack God's work. So we've spoken a lot about this. And if you're brand new, by the way, if you're brand new here on this for the first time, what I'm going to talk about may be very new to you. And so if you have questions, pop your video back on and we can talk about it. So some of you've heard this 1,000 times, it's old hat. But I want to go into this because this is kind of important. It's a foundational idea as we move through this book of Colossians, okay? So we know he just said he's challenging these dominions and these thrones because they control geography. So in 1 Peter 3:18, there were some who thought they could do their own agenda, and this is what happened to them. So for Messiah also suffered once for sins, the righteousness for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, to the Father, being put to death in the flesh and made alive in the spirit, in which he went. Now notice verse 19 is very key. In which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. He's not proclaiming, these are not humans. These are people from Genesis 6, these spirits from Genesis 6 that created a great crime on humanity. And he went and proclaimed judgment on these spirits in prison. All right. Now, why is this important? You guys may not recognize why this is so important. When he did that and came up, this sent a message to all these unclean spirits, these Elohims that had their own agenda, to every one of them, that they will be judged like the ones that are bound right now and down in Shiloh and Tartarus. Okay, that's what he's talking about here, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. So these spirits that are in the outer darkness, he went and basically proclaimed judgment on them as a message to the entire realm and all these dominions and thrones and all these others, that you've been defeated, it's over, and now I'm going to reclaim the territory, and you're not going to win this game. Now, again, they're going to have a say-so in it, but the message was loud and clear, and that's why I'm kind of showing you this. So what is this message? What was the message being sent? Well, here it is. Okay. Uh, Paul calls it a mystery. And we want to kind of unravel a little bit this mystery. But in Romans 11:25 says, lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of these mysteries, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel. Okay, let's take that and just move it aside. Okay, I don't want to focus on the partially hardening of Israel. I want to focus on until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so the key word for this is the Gentiles are going to come in where? Where are they coming into? They're going to be grafting in. They're going to be coming into Israel. They're going to become part of this kingdom called the Commonwealth of Israel. And as they are coming in, right, they're going to shed. This was a plan that was put in play before creation, and this was the plan to bring them back in. And there was not only just geography in mind, like it says in Matthew 24. There is also a number in mind as well. So there's both number and place involved in this idea of bringing them in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come from Sion. Salvation comes from the Jews. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob. Okay. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Okay. And that's part of that mystery. And so the mystery contains two things. One, it's the forgiveness of sins for the Gentiles and bringing the Gentiles into the commonwealth of Israel. Those both things are part of that mystery. Okay. So how do we know this? And some of you, like I said, some of you already, we've gone over this a few times, but at the Tower of Babel, the nations were disinherited because of their sin. They chose to worship these false gods. Okay.
Mhm.
And after the resurrection, both Israel and the nations could be accepted in the kingdom and have forgiveness of sins and put an end to death. So these two things is part of that mystery that had been prepared for, basically before Adam even sinned. Okay, let me show you a couple things just to kind of prove my point. Colossians 1:26, the mystery. Again, Paul's referring to this mystery hidden for ages. So it's been around. So this idea that he had planned has been around for a long time before he implemented the plan. And generations, but now revealed to his Kedoshim. Okay, the believer. The Kedoshim comes from the word Kodesh in Hebrew, meaning holy. And so the saints, I don't like that word personally. I don't think it conveys a different term. So you're going to see me use Kedoshim most of the time. To them, God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery, okay, which is beside in you in hope of glory. So if you go back to Romans, he's telling you, we're going to bring you in, we're going to give you forgiveness of sins, and we're going to show you how great God is. And he had this plan in place before time. Now, Deuteronomy 4 tells us why they got themselves in this place. It says, verse 19, beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the host of heaven. So, the host of heaven are these angels, and they brought worship to themselves by us focusing on a sun god, a moon god, a star, or some type of planet, Jupiter, whatever, Saturn, whatever. And so that's how these hosts of heaven drew worship. And the people, the nations, because of that, they congregated at the Tower of Babel, and God said, you're disinherited. And notice what he says here. All the hosts of heaven, you've been drawn away and bow down to them. Who do they bow down to? The hosts of heaven. And they serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted, given as an inheritance to the nations. The nations, all these nations were given over to these fallen angels because they chose. So they were divorced. But the plan was to bring the mystery, which is what Paul's calling this plan, is to go back and get them and bring them back in. They weren't always going to stay divorced. This is the idea. And through the Spirit of God, he was going to reconquer territory. And so how would he did it? Like in the way of Colossians, he put 2,000 families in this valley 200 years prior with anticipation of this coming in the future. You see, that's how God was planning things out step by step. It's really cool. But verse 20 says, but the Lord had taken you, the seed of Abraham, and brought you out of iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people, to be his inheritance as you are to this day. So what the Gentiles now can inherit is the inheritance that the seed of Abraham was given to them. They can also partake in that inheritance, and that's part of the mystery. Does everybody understand that? Is it clear as mud? Okay, so any questions on that? Okay, so this is, but again, where you and I don't see God working, like I said, this is a perfect example how he planted thousands of people in a place with anticipation of this one place being reconquered and placed back into the kingdom of God. And that
What's he
also,
talking about when he says about the eyes of heaven? When you see the sun, the moon, the stars, the host of heaven be drawn away, bow down to them, they serve them. What is that exactly about?
so whenever you hear the word in the Tanakh called Baal or Baalim,
God, right?
Baalim means the sun, the moon, the planets, stars. These are the focus of worship. But behind each one of those things that you look at, there is a fallen Elohim that's drawing worship to themselves. Okay, they are the face. So the face of them is a sun, a moon, and a star. But behind that image that people draw on a mural or a stele or a tomb is a fallen angel. Okay, that's what he's talking about. So the people after the Tower of Babel began worshiping these angels, but originally they were supposed to lead people into justice and righteousness. They didn't do it, and that's where they failed too. Okay,
Now, when he's talking about also about the furnace, back up one more.
yeah,
I'm just want to make sure I got this right. But the Father has taken you to brought you out of the furnace. I got to move my screen things here.
right there.
Out of the furnace, out of Egypt to the people of his own inheritance as you this day. Now, the inheritance that he's talking about is basically is that the Messiah, Yeshua, as
Well, okay,
his own inheritance, or
it's a physical inheritance of land, the land grant, because he's going to give the seed of Abraham back Eden. Now, we call it different names, but the idea is that his people would be in Eden. Okay. And so when he promised, he says, told Abraham, look north, look south, look east or west. And he begins to saying from the river, the great river, Euphrates, to Egypt, the river of Egypt. Okay. That is that's the territory, the entity of once was Eden. Okay. And he's saying, I'm going to give my people who are in worship with me, who follow me, I'm going to give you back Eden again, and you're going to live in perfect peace in Eden. And that so now it's in stages. So he gives it to the seed of Abraham. He brings them out of all right, if you look at the Nile River and the Euphrates River, look at them as boundaries from one kingdom to another. Like the Rio Grande, Mexico, United States, okay? So if the Nile River and the Euphrates would be boundaries of his kingdom versus the kingdom of darkness. Because at this point, all the earth is under the dominion of Satan and his angels, right? So, but he carves out his, and then he's going to draw all the nations to him by having a sacred space. We talked about this Saturday. Sacred space was Eden, but it starts small and then he would grow it out. Okay. So during the millennial reign, the entire Eden will be back under his control, and the nations will come into Eden and worship him. Okay, good question. All right, so after the guard, all mankind got a death sentence. After Genesis, that's Genesis 3. Genesis 6, the angels brought in depravity on the earth. And by the way, the reason why we have the law or Torah is because of Genesis 6. If Genesis 6 never happened, you could have, it would have sufficed to have an oral Torah. Okay? But because of the depravity that was brought in, what they did, you have to have things written down to put the guardrails and protections of a kingdom so that the kingdom doesn't get overrun by these false entities. Okay? That's why you have this constitution. And then Genesis 11 is the Tower of Babel, which we just talked about that. And then the mystery was that he's going to reconquer this territory that the sons of God had failed. And Psalms 82 addresses that. Rick and I talk about this a lot. So the book of Colossians is ground zero. This is what I think is really important about this book. It's ground zero for reconquering the nations. Why? Because it addresses the spiritual war that's going to take place. It addresses it in a very specific way, which we'll talk about next week. All right. So what time do we got here? Have I got 10 more minutes? We're good. Okay. So there's a lot of questions about this, but I want to get into the first fruits because this is kind of where we're in. First fruits of creation. Verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Okay. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him, for him. Okay. That you got it from Proverbs chapter 8, kind of restates this in a different way. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, okay, the congregation itself. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he may be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace, shalom, by the blood of his cross. Okay, this is a mission statement. Okay, we got a mission statement, and this is the theme of the entire scriptures right here. Okay, this is it. So if you never read anything else, okay, and you just took this 4 or 5 verses and you could witness from right here. That's all you would need. All the words sufficient in here to explain our great King and what he did for us. It's contained in these verses. So Yeshua is the first fruits of all creation. Now, we know Lazarus was raised from the dead, right? But he would die again. Now, notice this. I want to ask some questions, see what you guys think about this. So, in Matthew 27, verse 51, it says, Behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from the top to the bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. There's an earthquake. The tombs also were open, and many bodies of the Kedoshim who had fallen asleep were raised from the dead. Coming out of these tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city, that's Jerusalem, and appeared to many. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Open this up. What was the purpose of this right here?
That was the reason.
We missed your point. We missed what you were asking. Can you
Oh,
repeat it?
yes, I'm sorry. What is the purpose? And many bodies of the Kedoshim who had fallen asleep were raised from the dead. What's the purpose of this whole statement right here?
The
And
resurrection.
then they came out and they appeared to many. So I want to say they were raised and appeared to many. What's the purpose of that? It's this statement here.
It's the resurrection.
Okay, it is a resurrection, right? You're on track, but there's more to it. Keep
It's
going.
your hope. It's part of your hope.
Okay, all right, keep
It's part
going.
of your hope. And
Your mission.
have a resurrection. Even though they died back again, it showed us that Yeshua has the power to raise the dead, just like he told Mary Magdalene. She said, Yes, you'll raise us up on the last day. And he said, I am the resurrection.
All right, so we don't have any more information than this, but I would just submit to you this was part of his first fruits that came with him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think
Okay.
they went up to the heavenly realm after they witnessed to many.
Well, that was my question. They were raised from the dead, but did they continue to be living beings among the people? So
Well,
you think,
we're given no more information,
I
but
know.
based on, I would say, a hermeneutical principle here, that these were a first fruits, if you will, that followed Yeshua. A small inner circle of first fruits where more will follow, but it was to be a witness of Yeshua being the first fruits of the dead. Okay, it's a witness of that. So when they are placed in these resurrected bodies, they come out of these tombs, right, with the resurrected body. They begin to witness. They're bearing witness to Yeshua being first fruits of the dead. That's their whole responsibility while they were here on earth, and
Well,
that's what.
Robert,
Go ahead.
yeah, it looks like it said they raised when this curtain was split in two. That would be when Jesus went into the grave before he raised. That's the way I read that. Am I reading it
Yeah.
wrong?
So in Luke, I think, and I didn't put, I should, man, I should have put that on there. I think it's in Luke. It said that it was after he resurrected that they came. So
Yes, yes,
there's a, John, is that right?
that is right.
Okay. So yeah, there's more explanation in Luke that connects this. I apologize. I should have put parallel verses so you could see this. But yes, I believe this was part of that small, tiny first fruits that accompany it as witnesses to him being the first fruits of the dead. Okay.
So what comes to mind, Robert, is it's interesting. The curtain is torn in two.
Yeah.
We see resurrection.
Yep.
And when he takes the two and puts them back together, there's another resurrection. I don't know
So
if there's a little,
when you study, so when you study when you study temple service, the veil that was rent here is the one that goes into the holy place, right? Yeah, a couple things happen. Josephus talks about it. So what happens is you have a door that opens, and then behind the door there's a veil that's about 60 feet high, right? So after that veil was rent, the doorposts, you're in construction, they were never aligned, right? And so the door can never close again. And every time, so they would place it part two, and when they would open it and make this huge loud sound like it was going to come down, and they didn't dare replace these doors, right? Because there's massive doors. But what's interesting is the veil itself is the Milky Way. Okay. And so what he's saying, he's ripping the veil between the second and third heaven. That's what he's doing. That's the key right here. It's the second and third heaven is what's being rent, so we can now have access through Yeshua to the heavenly realm, to his throne. Okay. Now, if you don't study temple service, you would never know what the veils, how they're what's designed on them, because each veil has a specific meaning behind it. All right, good comments, guys. All right, very good comments. Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah, well, just that the Gentile church takes it to be the second veil. And of course, they have no history behind it. And they don't want to study the history behind it either. So,
no, they don't. And it goes back to my original thing. If you're coming into a new kingdom, you're leaving an old kingdom, come a new kingdom, you should stop declaring with your mouth that you're still part of that old kingdom, because all you're doing is placing a curse on yourself. When I left that kingdom, I don't want to be associated with worshiping these fallen angels or these angels in general. I want to be associated with just worshiping the one true God. So stop declaring that you're a Gentile, because when you do that, you're putting yourself under a curse, as far as I'm concerned. That's to be
yeah,
recorded and passed on to others in this mess.
I
Amen. That's
think
right.
the term Gentile is the worst translation on earth. It's just my opinion, please, but I really do.
So there's two
It should be like
translations.
pagan and in covenant. Like that's what.
Well, there you go. I think, but you got to also look at, so the word ethnos is sometimes used.
Mhm.
Okay, ethnos, which means where we get our word ethnicity, right?
Mhm.
It's also another word that applies nations
Right.
abroad. Out, okay. So sometimes that used, but then the term in Hebrew, goyim, okay, is a derogatory term.
Yes.
And
No.
it's not a positive term at all. So if they just left goyim when they had to, nobody would want to be a goyim, because the goy are not something you want to be associated with, because they're associated, as we just saw in Deuteronomy chapter 4, with worshiping the Baals. That's what they are known for. All right, good comments, guys. All right, I'm gonna finish this up here. Oh, there it is. That was quick. All right, let's stop the recording.
Yeah, your hand's been raised the whole time. You got questions to ask?
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I not see it?
Yeah, it's the hand is there, the hand of the Lord. It's on your
There you go. Yeah, he's had the hand up the whole time. He had a